Cecilia Gelland, and this is Violino Grande. In this video, I'm going to discuss the tonal and the playing technical characteristics of Violino Grande. This instrument is not a 5-stringed violin or viola. No string was added to it. It is designed from the beginning to have 5 strings, with the sound progressing truly organically from the C string to the top of the E string. The tone is natural, healthy and flexible from the bottom to the top, also in high positions on each string. When you move upwards on each string, I find that the color of the tone remains brilliant. It just doesn't change as much as on a violin or a viola. On a violin, you sometimes even choose to play something that you could play on the E string, on the A string instead, because you want that special, more subdued color. On the Violino Grande, the color does change, but not as much, so you might choose other ways of changing the color. As you see, the shape is different from the violin families. It has lent some aspects of its shape from the gamba. The inside structures are also somewhat different. The Violino Grande is not a violin or a viola, and it doesn't sound like it either. The sound production is also different. Perhaps there is a hint of gamba somewhere in it. There's a lot of self-resonance. Comparing the Violino Grande sound production to that of a violin or a viola, I noticed that the Violino Grande somehow asks for more bow. When I differentiate the tone color on the Violino Grande, I work a whole lot with bow speed. On the violin and the viola, I find that I work a little bit more with bow pressure, as if those instruments tolerate and ask for that more. Of course, with all of these string instruments, I use all the different bowing parameters to create and control tone color. Bow speed, bow pressure, placement of the bow closer or farther away from the bridge, and to some extent the amount of bow hair I use by tilting the bow. Even minute changes can make all the difference in the beginning or end or in the middle of a bow stroke. The composer Thomas Winter compares the Violino Grande to a tenor saxophone, where he explains that you shouldn't, so to speak, bite the tone, but keep your lower lip soft. It must sing, he says, it needs air. If you bite and press, the tone becomes hard and closed. The alto saxophone, he says, is in a sense more like a viola or a violin, because when it is called for, you can play more straight on in a tougher kind of a way, if the expression of the music demands that. The composer Kurt Wrange finds a depth that reminds him of a cello, but the tone seems to be under less pressure, somehow more free and open, always elegant. He says one instrument isn't better than another one, but different. You choose the music for the instrument and the other way around. He says, the composer Thomas Friberg likens the Violino Grande's tone to an alto voice like Kathleen Ferrier. This all means that great violin and viola music doesn't necessarily translate into great Violino Grande music, although it might, in which case it will show that music from a different side. The mensuration of a Violino Grande is larger than a violin. It's like on a medium-large viola, I would say. My viola is 42 centimeters. It has the same mensuration at this Violino Grande. So in double stopping, we must think more viola than violin. Trills of large thirds in the first position are for very large hands, not hands like mine. Since there are 5 strings and only 4 fingers, you can play chords with all 5 strings only if you either leave one string open or if you play a 5th somewhere using the same finger for 2 adjacent strings, but not the 4th finger. When you want chords with all 5 strings, I'd say think like a guitar. So rather this way around than that way around. And especially, the 3rd finger on the top string and the 4th on the bottom, that will not work very well because the arch that the little finger does is not high enough that strings are curved. It will cover other strings and muffle them. So this is better. Yeah, to some extent this works, but then not so many strings in between the fingers. There are some things that don't work, but there are a lot of things that do work. There's a video that I made of an etude that I call Trauermarsch. And it goes through all 12 keys. I made it for myself as a way of practicing chords. And it can give you some ideas of what's possible. Now, the G string on a Violino Grande is the middle string, not like on the violin where it's the lowest string and where you often play with a lot of pressure and a lot of strength. You can't quite do that on the Violino Grande the same way, because when I go up just a bit in position, I'd say from maybe F on the G string, the strings start to be leveled so that you play on all 3 of them at the same time. I'd have to go pretty close to the bridge to be able to touch only the G string when I'm in a high position like that. That can be awkward sometimes, but it also gives a lot of new possibilities. You can actually play sustained triple chords, all kinds of them, and that's a great opportunity that you don't have the same way on a 4-stringed instrument. This does work on other combinations of 3 strings as well, but not to such a great extent, because the higher strings, they are harder, while the lower string, like the G string, is thick and rather tends to bend down when you play on it. The sound of the Violino Grande is really pliable. The strings give different interesting colors, even very far from the bridge. The only limit is for the outer strings. Like when you try to play really far out here, you start touching the wood or you get a double stop. And well, you see where it starts happening. It's actually about where the fingerboard stops. And of course, on the middle strings, you can go as far out as you want. But if you have rosin on the bow, which you always do, the strings will start getting sort of gluey, and that's not so good for then the fingers get gluey also. So I wouldn't recommend doing it too much, but it is possible. And there are also some really interesting things happening when you don't press the finger down all the way. Of course, that is interesting on all string instruments, but the Violino Grande has some special qualities that come out when you play around with the finger pressure. Also, an interesting gray zone is when you give so much bow, when the bow is so fast that the tone starts losing its solidity. The transitions from noise to tone through ponticello or overpressure or the finger pressure leaving is really rich. They are rich to explore. I do a little bit of that in my two very first etudes on 6 pitches each. They are called Here and Now and Whoever Wandered. You find them on our YouTube channel. They came about the first week of my borrowing this Violino Grande. It wasn't fully restored yet, and playing the instrument was totally new to me. Further, the sound was recorded at home with just a cell phone. In spite of all of that, those 2 etudes actually do give some ideas and some insight about what a Violino Grande can do, especially in those gray zones that are interesting. With 5 very resonant strings, most pitches with their different overtones cause some other open string to resonate. So if you smear a constant thick vibrato over it all, it sort of takes away the charm and the purity of that resonance. So only ask for it when that's really what you want and need. I try to differentiate my use of vibrato a lot. This rich self-resonance gives different pitches, including the microtones, certain innate qualities. The composer Eliana Shapere asked me, where in your body do you sense each one of the different pitches? This was a totally new question to me, and a very fruitful one. Although the sound from each string to the next is so organic, each pitch still does actually have a personality. It's like a person that remains the same even when its moods change. I can feel this quality of the different pitches even without having perfect pitch like Mozart or Szymanowski or even my own husband Martin Jelland. They all have very personal relationships to different keys and pitches. I don't usually do that, but I'm learning some interesting things about this and about pitches. For example, here at the bottom, the C sharp has an incredible quality. I can I can feel it in my teeth. That's really funny. And yeah, I just loved exploring those qualities by playing a chromatic scale and even the pitches in between from the bottom to the top. So that's what I had to say about the Violino Grande today. And you're most welcome to ask your own questions or to have comments or ideas. It would make me really happy if you get back to me about Violino Grande. And if you're someone who's interested in composing for Violino Grande, I'm also very open for your ideas. See you next time.